So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events, events, that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario, for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea, might play out. The adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon, by David E. Sanger.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and boy, do I have one for you, which I'll get to in just a moment. There's a lot going on. In our second hour today, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. Federal regulators mortgaging the country to Wall Street. Yeah, this pandemic has proved a great opportunity for the right-wing billionaire class to extract more money from working class people and from the government as well, you know, our tax dollars and everything else. In our third hour, Chloë Waterman is going to be here to talk about this crisis of deaths in our meatpacking plants that are now forced back to work by presidential order. And of course, the top of the news right now is that two big Supreme Court decisions today. One where they said that basically, a good chunk, in fact, the eastern half, hang on just a second, let me find the story here, let me get to that in just a second as I find, I want to get the actual, all the words in it correct. This was about Indian land. The second one, though, is about Trump's tax returns. And Trump's tax returns, they're basically saying, no, I'm sorry, you don't have, absolute immunity, period. That's it. You don't have it. It ain't going to happen. I suppose that's the good news. I mean, basically, with the exceptions of Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas, who are just naked, not just Republican partisans, these guys are naked apologists for oligarchy and tyranny, frankly. I think they would be very happy if Donald Trump pulled a full Mussolini. And this has been their position on pretty much every single argument all along. Go along with what the right-wing billionaires tell you to do. That's Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, who's taken Scalia's place in that regard. But the other 7 members of the court said, no, the president's not above the law. Sorry. You've got, there were two lawsuits here, 2 cases. The first was that Cyrus Vance, the prosecutor, the Manhattan prosecutor, Manhattan District Attorney, wanted 8 years of Donald Trump's tax records, both corporate and personal, to present to a grand jury because he's alleging that by paying off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, he violated New York state campaign finance laws and thus can go to prison. And of course, Trump doesn't want anybody to see his taxes because he's scared to death that we're going to find out, number one, he's a criminal. Number two, he's been running a long con, a grifter. Number three, he's a tax cheat. I mean, the New York Times won a Pulitzer Prize for revealing that in 2018. Turns out they did it based on documents provided by Mary Trump. And number four, which probably should be number one, that he's nowhere near as rich as he claims he is. Oh, and number five, that he got most of his money laundering money for, foreign oligarchs, Russian oligarchs, Ukrainian oligarchs, Israeli oligarchs, Saudi oligarchs, God only knows. But that's how this guy got rich. There's a couple of quotes from this decision that are worth noting. This is within the decision, Chief Justice Roberts. He said, in our judicial system, quote, the public has a right to every man's evidence, end quote. That's from a previous Supreme Court decision. Since the earliest days of the Republic, every man has included the President of the United States. Beginning with Jefferson and carrying on through Clinton, presidents have uniformly testified or produced documents in criminal proceedings when called upon by the federal courts. This case involves, so far as we and parties can tell, the first state criminal subpoena directed to a president. The president contends that the subpoena is unenforceable. We granted cert to decide whether Article 2 and the Supremacy Clause categorically preclude or require a heightened standard for the issuance of a state criminal subpoena for a sitting president. And, they said, yeah, there's some other considerations, but he's not above the law. And the other considerations part means that they basically kicked it back down to the lower courts. So the question is, how rapidly can the lower courts act? The very end of the decision, Roberts wrote, when Congress seeks information, quote, needed for intelligent legislative action, end quote, this is from their pleadings, from the argument that Congress is making. It, quote, unquestionably remains the duty of all citizens to cooperate. Now that is a quote from a Supreme Court decision, Watkins, it was the case. Congressional subpoenas for information from the president, however, implicate special concerns regarding the separation of powers. The judgments of the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and Second Circuit are vacated. In other words, they struck down these two courts who said, yeah, Trump has to hand over his tax returns. But then in the last part of the sentence, and the cases are remanded for further proceedings consistent with this opinion. In other words, reconsider this, hear the arguments all over again, and come to a conclusion that includes basically what we're saying here. So that's like the big news, as it were. The conspiracy theory stuff that I was talking about, and the Oklahoma case. Nearly half of Oklahoma, this is a 5-4 decision, and the swing vote wasn't John Roberts, it was Neil Gorsuch, who's from Colorado, and has in the past ruled in favor of Native Americans. Living in Colorado, he's more sensitized and sensitive to Native American issues. And they ruled, and Sean is working on we have a regular guest who is a lawyer and is a Native American who is all over these kinds of issues. I really want to drill down into this, but the news stories that I have don't give me enough information to really be able to tell you exactly what this is going to mean. But the Creek people, the Muskogee Nation, apparently it just got a lot more power. We'll see. We'll see where this goes. I've got a couple of questions for you. One has to do with the schools, and we'll get to that after the break. But the other has to do with these far-right patriot groups. Over the 4th of July weekend, just last weekend, there were 2 cases where a really large number of these right-wing militia guys with their guns and their swastikas and their Confederate flags and all this kind of stuff showed up well-armed, ready for battle, twice. Once was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This was a Civil War historical site. And the other was in Seattle. And in both cases, and in Gettysburg, it was like hundreds of these guys showed up. In Seattle, it was a relatively small group. But in both cases, what they were responding to were fake calls to action on Facebook. In both cases, somebody had posted on Facebook the story that black people were going to show up in Gettysburg and in Seattle and basically, burn flags, American flags. I mean, this was basically, it was called the flag burning event in Gettysburg. The post that got these guys mobilized was headlined, "Antifa is coming to take our country back from right-wing lunacy." Right. And this ex-radio host, Hal Turner, he jumped in on this thing. He claimed the 4th of July flag burning was occurring, quote, "just before they begin murdering white people and burning down suburbs the same day." In other words, these guys thought this was the beginning of the race war, the Civil War. He goes on to say, this guy, he's got a huge following on social media. "Yes, this is the great purge. The evidence is all there. The objective is clear. It makes no difference as to what ideology a white person has. As long as you are white, you must be erased. This is their sick agenda." Now, of course, none of that is true, but these guys showed up. So my question, is this a dry run? I mean, is somebody just punking these guys? Or is somebody doing, testing? Let's find out what happens if Donald Trump loses the election and claims that it was stolen from him and that Antifa and black people did it. And like he said in 2016, black people are in buses from Boston going up to New Hampshire. He said that's why he lost the New Hampshire primary. Is this a dress rehearsal?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And if so, what does it say? I mean, it wasn't that large a group in Seattle, but it was in Gettysburg. What the hell is going on here? And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thanks so much for taking my call, and good day to you and your teammate. Tom, I don't think we should open school unless we have a vaccine, really. I mean, because it is very dangerous. Schools are going to be the fastest way this virus is going to spread. A kid will go to school, bring it home, and it's just going to spread out like a wildfire, Yeah. Normally.
Well, there is some evidence, Omar, that if you look at the way that Taiwan and South Korea and Japan have reopened their schools, and I'm not sure, but I believe Australia and New Zealand are doing similar things, and perhaps some of the European countries are. And it would be, some good investigative reporter needs to do a broad survey of this. But I saw a special on one of the networks a couple of weeks ago about how one of the Asian countries, they're reopening their schools where the classes are no larger than 10 kids. Those same 10 kids are basically, met outside by the teacher, brought into the classroom. They stay in that particular classroom with that particular teacher through the entire half a day or so that they're doing classroom instruction. About half of the instruction is being done online and half of it in the classroom. The kids, no more than 10 kids, they're all sitting 6 feet apart from each other. They have plexiglass shields in front of each one of their desks. The teacher's behind a shield up at the front of the desk, at the front of the room. They've altered the HVAC systems in the classrooms so that they're continuing drawing air out of the classrooms and, fresh air is coming in from a central source. So all of these things are designed to minimize the spread of the virus. If we did that in the United States, the best guess, if we were to really, retrofit our schools and teach this way, the best guess of the cost would be around $200 billion, which, ain't a lot. I mean, Congress has appropriated a hell of a lot more than that just to give billionaires tax cuts. It costs about $200 billion. But it would take 6 months, to set up our schools. We should have been doing this in February.
Exactly. We're not doing that. That's my point. We're not doing that. Betsy DeVos is not doing that. She's probably riding one of her 10 yachts that she has. But that's what I mean. We're not preparing for this at all. And I think it's just going to increase the virus throughout the country. This is the fastest way you can spread. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Tom, is that Trump seems to be running on law and order. Do you think there's a silent majority for him, like Nixon talked about back in the days?
I think when Nixon was president, I was alive when Nixon was president. In fact, I was a teenager when Nixon was president, and in my early 20s. And so, I was paying attention. And, having been a white person back then, I can tell you, I mean, I still am, obviously, but I can tell you that I don't think most white people had any sense, a real deep, visceral sense. And I think this is probably true of at least 80-90% of white people in the country, because the country has been so segregated, throughout its history. I don't think most white people had any idea what life was like for most black people, particularly when it comes to things like police violence, but even more broadly speaking, job opportunities and everything else. In fact, back then, what we were hearing was the echo of the affirmative action stuff from the 60s that LBJ did, and all the Republican pushback to it about how it wasn't necessary and everything is good. And so, there wasn't the white outrage that you're experiencing right now that people can see the lives of black people through their camera videos, through their phone videos. I think things are very, very different, Omar, and I don't think that white majority of silent white people is going to work. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these 3 guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. Okay, so there is that, right? There is the Supreme Court thing, and frankly, just to summarize, the bottom line is there's a pretty good chance that between now and the election, nobody is going to see Donald Trump's tax returns. There's also I think, probably 30, 40, 50% chance that between now and the election, at least the New York grand jury, Cyrus Vance's grand jury, will see his tax returns. But the grand jury on the Russia investigation, the Mueller investigation, that testimony is still secret. Bill Barr has been holding it close to his vest. He's been keeping it secret. Little tiny bits of it have been pried out, but by and large, it's still secret because it's grand jury stuff. So, I don't think, frankly, that we're going to see Trump's tax returns in any meaningful way before the election. It's possible, but I think it's unlikely. But, so number one, do you think that there is enough of a critical mass of crazed white people ready to go to Trump's defense that this actually represents a threat of a second Civil War kind of event? And number two, I want to talk about our schools. I think this is going to be the official end of the Trump presidency. Or unofficial, but this is going to be the big thing. And here's why. On his first full day in office, January 21st, maybe it was the 22nd, maybe his second full day, but one of his first 2 days in office, he signed an executive order to gut the implementation of the Waters of America Act. What it did was it let coal mines and factories start just randomly dumping, well, not randomly, but start dumping their poisons, the coal slurry, the toxic waste, into our rivers and into our waterways. Now, in my opinion, he got away with that because he only poisoned the people downstream in those waterways. And so, only a few million people had their children neurologically damaged by mercury, and a lot of that neurological damage won't show up for years. It's only going to produce a couple 100,000 cases of cancer, and a lot of those aren't going to show up for decades. So, it was scattershot, right? If there wasn't a massive national constituency of people going, oh my God, he just poisoned our water. Most Americans get their water, from aquifers or, from things other than river water. So Trump allowing factories to poison river water, it was a big deal for people who live around, like the Mississippi and the Columbia, but like I said, most Americans are getting their water out of, getting their water out of aquifers and things like that. But now he's trying to force every school in America to open in the next few weeks. I mean, some schools are opening in August. Some, probably the majority of them open either the last week of August or the first week or two of September. So that's what, 8 weeks, 7 weeks, 6 weeks in some cases, or less, down the road. And in this case, he's threatening to poison, and I put that in quotes because he's threatening to poison them with COVID-19. But, instead of threatening to just poison the people who live downstream from the rivers, which has been going on now for 3.5 years because of Trump's executive order, he's threatening to poison every school in America. And every school child and every teacher and every janitor and every school resource officer and every counselor. I mean, he got away with closing or weakening over 100 different federal agencies that protect people from being poisoned, that protect people from being defrauded. He's even gutted the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or that protect people from being just generally harmed by corporate bad actors and grifters. But each one of those agencies only protected a small slice of America, small constituency. So there was never this loud enough response to his policies, like people who value public lands or people who use national parks or, fill in the blanks, right? The things the people who cared about bears' ears. It was a small number of people. Even his decision to do nothing about Russia paying bounties to kill American soldiers. And by the way, Tammy Duckworth is the only member of Congress who's continuing to pound this. And have you noticed over the last couple of days, the only member of Congress Trump is trashing is Tammy Duckworth? But even his decision to say, oh, hey, no problem if foreign governments want to pay to kill, bounties to kill American soldiers, that really only affected military families, which is only about 5% of America. But for the first time, this policy is going to hit almost everybody. Tens of millions, maybe 100 million Americans will all realize at the same time that Trump's incompetence and frankly his malice could lead to their own illness and maybe even their own death. Which raises the question, is this going to be Trump's Waterloo? Will this cripple the ability of Republican elected officials, state, federal, House, Senate, to get reelected? How badly is this going to hurt the Republican Party? Or is there some bizarre universe in which Trump doing this, opening the schools, forcing them open, will actually help Donald Trump? Could this be the thing that triggers the civil war that the Boogaloo Boys and the 3%ers are rehearsing? Will he simply get away with another outrage, killing another couple of 100,000 Americans?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your thoughts on all of this right after the break. Skip it.
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government, grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, I'm asking, will the new definitions of first world and third world be those countries that have the virus under control and those countries that don't? Connor Gibson with Greenpeace USA is here about 3 states making protesting fossil fuel pipelines a felony. Is protesting becoming illegal now? Robert Weissman with Public Citizen drops by. He's concerned about Trump's land management pick. The guy's a climate-denying extremist. I'm concerned too. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is telling us about even more nuclear waste that they want to bury under New Mexico's desert. Plus, geeky science. Does sitting cause cancer? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Oh, this is hysterical. Breaking news. Newsweek magazine is reporting that David Duke, the former leader of the Klan, he's calling for Donald Trump to nominate Tucker Carlson as his vice president. He says that would save America. This is David Duke tweeted, President Trump, you have one last chance to turn the tables, win this election and save America and yourself. Nominate Tucker Carlson for vice president. This would energize your campaign beyond belief. Tucker Carlson now. We don't have 4 years. In 4 years, there'll be no dissident websites, platforms, or email addresses. No dissidents allowed credit cards or bank accounts. No freedom, and Tucker will be off the air before Biden's even sworn in. Tucker now. 4 years is too late. One more thing about Tucker, Mr. President. It would make you impeachment-proof, and Tucker would whip those Republican people into line and make them defend our freedom of speech and the heritage of the American people. In other words, white supremacy. Isn't that sweet? You know, the official head of the white supremacists, former Klan leader David Duke, throwing praise on the unofficial leader of the white supremacists in America, Tucker Carlson. It's incredible. It's incredible. Amazing. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind?
You had asked a question, Mr. Hartman, about this strategy.
Is this a dress rehearsal?
Yeah. Yes. And your question was, will it work? My question to you is, when hasn't it? Other than the Civil War. And the reasons for that are debatable. When hasn't it? I mean, Willie Horton meet a sister soldier. George Wallace meet Donald Trump. Doesn't matter. This is America's drug of choice. You can call it race or whatever, but always black people. Let's frighten people. So my question to you is, when hasn't it worked? Or not necessarily you, but your listeners or whomever. When hasn't it worked? And I did want to also make the statement with regards to the reopening of these schools. You know, I've got a child in college now that I have raised alone from the day she came into this world. You know, Tom, let me tell you something. I don't care about political ideologies. I think you know that I am a nonpartisan person because as far as I'm concerned, neither of those parties represent my interest and my existence as a black man in America. I said it before, I'll say it again. However, when you hurt children, you know, that's a horse of a different color, no pun intended. All of the world's ills, Tom, climate change, racism, whatever, sexism, can be cured if everyone in the world takes care of children, period. There's enough food, there's enough everything.
That's a beautiful sentiment. Yeah, I get it, and that's my point. I think that Trump has gone way too far with his school thing, particularly trying to blow up the CDC, and now he's got the director of the CDC pushing back on him, saying, no, I'm not going to rewrite the guidelines. And those guidelines are very watered down compared to other countries, number one. Number two, when has racism not worked for politicians in America, for white politicians in America? You know, it's a damn good question, and Kenyatta, I believe you're absolutely right. I mean, we saw just in relatively recent history naked racism. You look at the Willie Horton ad that George Herbert Walker Bush was running. You look at not just Ronald Reagan giving a speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi, but Don Jr. giving a speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi as his first speech at the Nebosha or whatever it is, county fair there right down the road from where Schwimmer and Cheney and Goodman were murdered. Somebody called earlier and said, is Nixon's silent majority still around, which was a euphemism for white people who were willing to vote race. And
I know that.
I think, I think they're still around, but I think they've gone from being 70% of white people to being 30% of white people in the last 50 years. What do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what. I've, as you know, I'm an avid fan of yours and listener of your show, reader of your books, and student of yours. I'm not, I don't, my nose is
and
brown.
I have
nature.
you, but let's get right to
it. Okay. But
I read your stuff over at Op-Ed News all the time.
Listen, but I do want to tell you this. I am hearing a lot of your callers and listeners and guests talk about the young people and that's going to make the change. And I know this is kind of an obtuse answer to your question. But, Tom, the one thing that I'm not hearing is that these white supremacy groups, in terms of young people, they are experiencing record membership. And that's not being talked about. Yes, they are.
Yeah, they're recruiting. And they're recruiting in the military and they're recruiting in police departments, and all that is being, reported, although it's not headline stuff in the national media, but it's out there. But, the question is, are they going to be able to push beyond that 30% ceiling? I really think that the old generation of white people who weren't just okay with racism helping them out a little bit or, or happy about the fact that they never even had to think about race, those people are dead and dying. And my generation, which was, largely, I would say, probably more ignorant of it. I mean, we were sensitized in the 60s by LBJ and by Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, but not to the point of becoming racial activists. I think that, this young generation, the millennials and probably the generation just before them, they have woken the hell up, Kenyatta. They are here. And they are substantial. I mean, the millennials right now is a larger generation than the boomers. And they're just coming into their own in a big way. And when you look at the George Floyd protests, I mean, in some cases, those people out on the streets who were protesting were majority white, carrying Black Lives Matter signs. So, I'm very hopeful, actually, that we're hitting a turning point. And I realize how long it's going to take and how hard it's going to be and how, god-awful, it still is. But what say you? I guess I'll ask you again. Do you think that we might be at a turning point? Do you think it's even possible?
Oh, God, Tom. Honestly, I'm in my late 50s now, and I've had so many horrible experiences. And I've had more probably than the average black person, only because I grew up educationally anyway, around white people. So I was more exposed to them, and I just, I want to be optimistic about this, but it's just too horrible a part of the history of the country. And there's dishonesty on both sides, and I don't see any honesty now. You can't look at the what, you have to look at the why. And this is what Americans do not do. I'm going to build a border fence. I'm going to build a big, beautiful wall because there are drugs and narco traffic. But you don't ask the question, why does the United States need so many drugs? Why does the United States, what's wrong with this society that it requires this much dope? I know you're running out of time. I got a prognostication for you politically. If Donald Trump gets a second term, you better be looking for Sarah Palin somewhere.
Really? I think the Sarah Palin that we have. There's a few candidates. You've got Tom Cotton out there, although he's far more articulate than she is.
He's dangerous.
Tucker Carlson. Yeah. No, I think Tom Cotton is going to be 2024. He's going to be the Republicans' total pro-fascist candidate, in my opinion. And he's running for it right now.
He's the new Mitt Romney. He's Mitt Romney retooled.
Yeah.
No, he is.
Yeah, maybe.
And he's
I'd say
kinda
McCain,
cool.
more like McCain. You know, he's trying to portray himself as kind of the outsider, and he's not. You know, because Romney's baggage was that he's a billionaire. You know, he doesn't admit it, but there's a pretty good.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. We'll split the baby in half. Let's say that John McCain and Mitt Romney had a baby. It's Tom Cotton. There you go.
It's Tom Cotton. Yeah. Oh, except there's some good George Wallace thrown in there. But you know, Tom Cotton saying, you know, there's no such thing as a bad war. America needs to be fighting these wars. I just, you know, it's a fascinating time, Kenyatta. It's a fascinating time to be alive in America. My sense of it, you know, I had this sense in the 70s that America was changing, not about race. This was about war, and you know, the war in Vietnam, and about civil rights, broadly speaking. You know, the right of free speech, things like that, because that's really where most of my energy was. You know, focus being at MSU, which was, you know, it was just an all-white environment that I was in, by and large. But now I think that that's shifting in other areas. I think that, although we did go backwards, we still are fighting illegal wars. Kenyatta, nice to hear from you. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
Yeah, good talking to you. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. The headline over at Daily Kos, Indiana cops do little after black man and witnesses report attack from would-be lynch mob. We really need that anti-lynching law. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So is this school thing going to be Donald Trump's Waterloo? Is this the war that he loses? Or the battle that he loses that causes him to lose the war? And welcome back. Moj. Am I saying that right? Listen on KPFK in LA?
Yes, you are.
MOJ?
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Hartmann,
I'm listening.
you mentioned how do you argue?
Moj, I'm going to have to put you on hold. Your phone is fading in and out. I thought you were waiting for me to speak or something, but your phone is just, she's on line 5, Joyce, if you want to check that out and find out what's going on. Jen in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Jen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. My mom's a high school teacher in Taiwan, and I just want to compare their response to the COVID-19 to America's dismal response and how Trump has really politicized education. And especially from the international student policy that was issued recently to forcing schools to open it back up, that's really ridiculous.
Yeah. So what has your mom is teaching high school in, what did you say, South Korea? Taiwan. In Taiwan.
So,
how are they different from what we're experiencing here?
Well, Taiwan took the coronavirus really, really seriously. I flew back in January 18th, around that time for the election, and I was already noticing signs in the airport that was saying that if you had recently visited the Wuhan area, you had to download an app and self-report and quarantine and do all these measures. And then I believe they postponed school openings for about 3 to 4 weeks around the February, March time when people were trying to figure out what's going on with this virus. And then when they finally opened schools back up, I believe they have about around 30 people per class. And they issued a really strict policy that everyone has to wear masks and temperatures are taken for everyone before they're able to enter the school. And then they also had a policy from the Department of Education that if one student tested positive for coronavirus, the class would have to shut down. But if 2 people were tested positive within the school, the entire school would have to shut down.
Wow. So, taking it seriously takes on a new meaning here. I mean, they are taking this very seriously. Did they put up the plexiglass shields around the students' desks like I've seen pictures of this on TV, or was that another country?
No, I don't believe so. The way education is structured there is a little bit differently. Students did not travel from class to class in the beginning, so I think they had that advantage. And teachers were providing lectures with their masks on, and the Department of Education actually provided masks to students who did not have them.
Right. Yeah, I actually wrote a book about education, and for that book, I visited the Taiwanese public schools back in the late 90s. And I was very, very impressed by the way that they were teaching, particularly one teacher who was basically doing Socratic teaching. I mean, she was, instead of saying things to her students, she was constantly asking questions and drawing them out, and they would have break into discussion groups and things like this. It was fascinating. Very, very comprehensive, good education. Jen, you want to make a final point real quick?
I just think the U.S. needs to take coronavirus seriously, and it's getting really scary.
Yeah, I'm with you. And that's why I think that Donald Trump is going to fail on this. But we'll see. Jen, thank you for the call. And thanks for sharing your story. It's a great one. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes, or will be shortly, 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. So we just put up a new member-only video talking about Donald Trump being a racist and how we're all dancing around there, or at least the media. By we, I'm talking about the media that I'm a part of, I suppose. The media broadly is and for that matter in Congress. I mean, with this House resolution to condemn Trump's racist tweets, they couldn't condemn Trump as a racist. That would have been a violation of House rules. But his tweets, we'll condemn them, right? This is the same guy who said, and I quote, "Laziness is a trait in blacks," end quote. He said, quote, "Immigrants from Haiti all have AIDS," end quote. He said, if Nigerian immigrants came here, they would, quote, "never go back to their huts," end quote. He referred to S-hole countries. He lied about Obama repeatedly. I mean, anyhow, let's just call out his racism. All the examples are in the video, and I think you'll find it fascinating. It's available over at thomhartmann.com, so check it out. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jose in Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Jose, what's up?
I would just a question about the schools opening. I myself am a teacher. In fact, last year at teaching, but the opening of the school seems really insane because the rise in numbers, the way that people are not acting in positive ways to block the growth of this virus. I don't see how school can be run. In our system, we received an email where it's green, color green for a school is regular. Then we have a A/B system where some will go one day, another, and then one day virtual. Then we have an option for everybody going virtual. That's what was thrown at us because the governor is just now of Ohio is just now coming out with plans, and I don't really see it happening. And I do think that it could be the point at which Trump totally loses because he may not love children, but the families do. I know how I work with families all the time, and no one wants to endanger their children just to get him on the positive side or to get him elected. I do think this could be what you call his Waterloo.
I think so too, Jose, and I don't think it's just the concern about the kids because this infection generally doesn't sicken kids terribly, although it does take down some, and and there have been a lot of children who have died from this, and many of them are getting these. It starts out with these bruises and these blisters on their toes, but sometimes it goes in systemic. We don't know. I mean, this virus has only been in existence in the human population for 6 or 8 months, so we don't know what's going to happen a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road to these kids who got the infections. They may well have lasting neurological damage. They may well end up, like Parkinson's patients, because it seems to attack those parts of the brain that are in that region. But we just don't know. But I think beyond the concern about the kids, which you absolutely correctly point out, Jose, I think you got a lot of parents who are concerned that the kids are going to bring the virus home to them, and and maybe to grandpa and grandma, or older uncles and aunts and things. I mean, or to even their immune compromised or diabetic or overweight or smoker or asthma or whatever. Family members, maybe even older brothers and sisters. I think people are pretty flipped out. Jose, thank you for the call. Greg in Knoxville, Tennessee, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom, good to talk to you.
Thank you, Greg.
I'm looking just a little bit different from the transportation end of the school because I'm a school bus driver. And here in East Tennessee, we're supposed to start school back August 10th. And if you know anything about East Tennessee, you know how hot and humid it is in August. So anyway, I'd say about 80 to 85% of our drivers are retirees.
Oh my.
To supplement their Social Security, because Social Security is barely enough to live on. Yeah. So here's the deal. We're talking elementary school children here. I've been driving for 13 years, and out of those 13 years, I can only remember 1 year that I didn't have to clean up vomit off the school bus. Now, these small children, they get sick on the bus. It's a common occurrence. You do get a cleanup kit with the bus. It consists of a little baggie of cat litter, a pair of latex gloves, a broom, and a dustpan. So what are we supposed to do when one of these kids gets sick and vomits on the bus? Are we supposed to clean that up with that cleanup kit? Or are we supposed to clear the bus out and have a hazmat team come in there and do it?
Yeah, because that kid might have coronavirus, and that may be actually toxic medical waste, basically.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, by then it's going to be all over the bus.
Yeah.
If the kid's
even if the kid is just shouting, his breath will be all over the bus. He doesn't need to throw up. He can just talk loudly, and boom, everybody within 10 feet of him is infected.
Yeah, last year I even had a kid got a nosebleed. He bled all over the seats. I mean, I just don't know what we're supposed to do with that.
Yeah.
Like I say,
are you going to go back to work, Greg, if you're called back?
No, I'm not going.
Yeah.
Most of our drivers are elderly, retirees, and most of them have, pre-existing conditions.
Right, and they would be crazy to go back to work, and the same is probably true of a significant fraction of teachers. You've probably got a lot of teachers, maybe 10, 20, 30% of your teachers are probably over 50, and some of them have pre-existing conditions.
And if you have a kid get sick on the bus, that means everybody on the bus is going to have to quarantine, right?
Right.
So, and we're short drivers anyway. I memean, who's going to drive the bus? The driver will have to be quarantined also, so I don't know what their plan is.
Yeah. Well, it should. This is why I said yesterday that we should call on the school board to do these things. School board members should be the bus drivers. School board members should be the substitute teachers. They're the ones who decide when the school opens and how the school opens. They're the ones who decide the school budget. So put them on the friggin' front lines. Greg, thank you for the call. Mark Pocan sent a letter to the presidents of American Airlines and United Airlines yesterday. I have a copy of it here, suggesting that they should fly in the backs of their planes in the middle seats. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's brilliant. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program specifically. It's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, et cetera, not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters, not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. The American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. "A slave is as good as gold," Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. Is this
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books. His latest, Understanding Socialism. rdwolff.com with 2 F's is another of his websites. Prof. Wolff, PROF, is his Twitter handle. And Professor Wolff, welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us every week here. I find these conversations so useful. This piece in Huffington Post, Federal Regulators are mortgaging the country to Wall Street, is pretty shocking. I know you've read it. Nearly 300 pages of loopholes and exemptions to the Volcker Rule and Dodd-Frank. This all sounds kind of arcane as I drop this setup here. Translate this into English for us. What does this mean?
Well, it's a kind of think of it as a kind of replay of history. A bad story, not taken seriously, and so it comes back to bite us again. Let me explain.
Okay.
In the depths of the Great Depression, back in the 1930s, a banking bill was finally pushed through Congress, and it was designed to reduce the systemic risk that came from the fact that banks had been free to take the money of their depositors and not merely hold it and keep accounts for them, but in fact to speculate with other people's money. And it was felt that that had contributed to the breakdown in 1929 and the horrible Great Depression. So the Banking Act, passed in the 30s, created a wall. It was called a wall of separation. 2 kinds of banks: a commercial bank that simply took deposits and made short-term loans to businesses, versus an investment bank, a completely different thing, that did not take deposits and that could go out and speculate, but with money that people gave it for that purpose. And that was felt to be a useful wall of separation. Immediately when the bill was passed, it was opposed by the banking industry. They went to work to evade it. After a while, they weakened it. And in the 1990s, they felt strong enough to make a frontal assault, and they got the bill. It was called Glass-Steagall after the people in the Senate and the House who had pushed it through. They got it repealed, and Bill Clinton, as president, signed the repeal. Okay, fast forward. That happened, by the way, at the end of the 1990s. By 2008, everything that we had predicted happened. By having ended the controls and the regulations that had been passed, we had another doozy collapse. In the aftermath of that, here comes the repetition of history, we had the Dodd-Frank bill that put a number of weak controls and regulations on the banks again, and for the same reason, namely that they had contributed to the chaos of 2008. And again, the banks opposed it. And when they couldn't block it, they went to work to weaken it and stall it and evade it, which they did until this last week when they finally succeeded with a pliant Trump administration to get several of the key and the only few remaining limits on the bank to be relaxed. It's roughly the equivalent of, canceling Glass-Steagall back in the 1990s. It's a horrible rerun. It allows the banks here at a very dangerous time to take much more risk than they had been allowed to take before. And you have to shake your head at a system so dependent on private capitalist banks that even when they do the worst kind of disaster, illegal, unethical, speculative, they are powerful enough to get a pliant political system to take away the few constraints that their terrible performance put on them in the heat of the breakdowns.
Yeah, it is pretty breathtaking. What does this mean for the average American who has their money in the bank or has a certificate of a deposit or needs a bank to get access to their paychecks?
Well, what it's doing is it's telling them, if they pay attention, that the level of risk that they are undertaking when they interact with banks is now much higher than it was a week ago. The banks are now able to do things, speculative things, risky things that they had been limited or blocked from doing before. Nobody says anything. No one's going to pay you a nickel more to hold your money. It's just that the banks are now free to take more risk. That's always been their position. They do not want their risks limited. They want the bailout when the risks they take don't work out. We have that unspeakable arrangement in this country where the bankers insist they're efficient and they're the best risk takers, and then every time when they really mess up, we are all on the hook to bail them out, and here you have again more and more risk. And by the way, the difference is we are now at a very, very dangerous time throughout the world, partly because of the global crash of capitalism and partly because of the pandemic. So it would be a time when you would probably, if you were half rational, want there to be less risk. But no, the banks have their own agenda. This is good for their bottom line. Their literature is full of that. They don't even hide it. That's what they want. You know, we live in a time when this system is breaking down, and it's every institution for itself. The banks saw a chance with Trump and with the Democrats unwilling to be really oppositional to get this kind of thing done, and so they went for it. And we're all going to live with the extra risk, and then when it crashes next time again, we will hear all the moaning and wailing, and whatever the next wave is will once again put on a reform which the banking sector will try to stop, and if it can't stop it, it will follow by evading it, then weakening it, and when they can get it done, get rid of it, which is what they did again last week.
So would people be advised to put their money in credit unions and locally owned banks, small banks that don't engage in this kind of speculation, as opposed to the big national banks? Is that and does the FDIC protect investors any longer?
Well, the problem with there are a number of questions here. The credit union is always more cautious than any bank, small, medium, or large. So if you want caution, then the credit union. But remember, we are living in a time of enormous unemployment, and many credit unions have loans out to people who cannot pay them back. And the danger for credit unions is also there. You might have a bit less of a speculative risk, but you are now more in danger of the more systemic collapse coming and biting you that way. Small banks are so locked into big banks that you don't get much more safety from them because of their interdependence with the big ones. So I think you have to face the fact that this is a banking system that plays the game with politics. They take risks as much as they can, and if they want to make more money and take bigger risks, they just have to go to the political leadership and get that done. That's what they did this week. There's really very, very little that we as a people can do about it. Individually escaping from this, I wish there were some mechanism, some little nostrum, some advice I could give you. But I hate to do this, but the only honest answer about that is you've got to change this system. I mean, let me underscore it another way, Tom. Everything is breaking down because the tenants aren't paying the rents and the landlords aren't paying back their loans. It's kind of everybody for themselves. And in that situation, whatever the system offered before in the way of orderliness, even that is now being taken away.
Remarkable. Professor Richard Wolff, rdwolff.com. And hang on just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And democracyatwork.info and Prof. Wolff over on Twitter. Professor, thank you. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
If this is the tipping point, the business of Trump with the schools, which water molecule was it that sank the Titanic? I mean, it was a process that was inevitable. And in terms of what's happening with kids, I commend the example of Jaden H. of Queens, New York, an 8-year-old who died. He had been infected with COVID-19 and gotten all better, and then all of a sudden, down he went. Fortunately for us, it was only a clinical death because his older brother was there. He had learned CPR, and he did CPR on his kid brother until the paramedics showed up and took him to the hospital. Since then, he has returned home. But this is an example. Can you
post that story to my Twitter feed, Mike?
No, I can't do Twitter. I'm sorry. It's the middle of May. Easily findable. But this is the sort of thing that's likely to happen over and again if Trump actually got his way. Now, one thing that perhaps has not escaped everyone's attention is that Trump has a habit of making grandiose threats, which he then has no way of following through with. He cannot force schools to open by threatening their federal funds if it means endangering the kids. And if he does actually succeed in some of the red states, what he's going to end up with, I trust before November 3rd, is a lot of potentially juvenile pediatric COVID-19 infections. You get a bunch of these happening here, there, and the other place. People are going to remember things like how he forced everyone in his administration to lie about this disease, except the CDC, which is now a story on the internet about how he and his own agency are at loggerheads about what's safe to do with kids. People are going to remember this. We had the Health and Human Services Secretary, Azar, say that medical workers don't get infected because they use social distancing and PPE.
Right.
Well, I don't know if this guy has ever seen a hospital drama on television, but when people are intubating or getting a blood draw, they are not using 6-foot-long laryngoscopes or 6-foot-long hypodermic needles. I mean, it's a preposterous lie. I mean, it's insulting to anyone that hears it. And it reminded me of Professor Finkelstein's book out now, a brief one, called A Brief History of Fascist Lies. And the way these sorts of regimes will invoke mythology and how the supreme infallible leader's statement is truth, regardless of whether the facts line up with it or not. And I think more and more people are going to react against that. You know, I mentioned before that I have this shirt with the Trump death clock printed on the front with the updated morning number. And whenever I go out to buy groceries, I wear the thing. Most workers, of course, can make political statements to customers, but yesterday the checkout clerk said, "You made my day with that shirt." So I really think people are catching on to what Trump is.
People are getting it. Yeah, at least in Lomita, California. I think, though, that it's happening all over the country, particularly now that red states are getting infected. Mike, thank you for the call. It is waking people up. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So he tore children from their parents and put them in cages and ordered the U.S. government to pay $750 a day to for-profit companies that support his candidacy and his campaign and his presidency. Number one, I mean, here's a partial list of some of the crimes of Donald Trump. Refused to release his tax returns, made his fortune, largely through financial fraud, has been accused of sexually assaulting multiple women, became president as a result of the involvement of a foreign government in part, became president in part because he paid hush money to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. He described Nazis and white supremacists as very fine people. I mean, this goes way beyond the tan suit. We've got the entire list, the whole list of all of Donald Trump's crimes in a new video we posted over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, so you can check it out there. He needs to be impeached. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I'm still just boggled by the fact that Alex Azar, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the former CEO of Eli Lilly Company, the guy who doubled the price of insulin for all you diabetics out there, he is now in charge of all the health in America, right? The HHS secretary. And he said that, quote, "We have healthcare workers, they don't get infected because they take appropriate precautions. This can work. You can do this. There's no reason schools have to be in any way different." Right. This is a lie. 94,000 healthcare workers in the United States have become infected with COVID. Over 700 of them have died. Are we going to be looking at these kind of numbers for teachers? But beyond teachers, are we going to be looking at these kind of numbers for parents? And by the way, the healthcare workers are not dealing with, frankly, I don't know how many the total number of school children in America. It's probably 20, 30 million, something like that, maybe 40 or 50 even. I mean, there's a lot of kids, right? And they've got a lot of parents, presumably roughly twice as many, and extended family members, probably roughly 3 times as many. And we're seeing these kind of deaths among healthcare workers. Really, is this the hill that Trump thinks he's going to plant his flag on? Does he think this is what's going to give him the victory? Rama in Williamstown, Vermont. Rama, you were my producer back when we started this show in Vermont, but as I recall, you were also on the school board there in the town that you live in.
Yes, hi, Tom. How you doing? Don't forget to tell people you were my boss way back when, too. And an excellent boss you were, by the way. You would pay me with wine, and I don't drink, so my wife said thank you a lot.
Yeah, that was back before we had even one single advertiser, and we were doing this whole thing. And I thought we were partners in crime, but in any case, go ahead.
No, hey, listen, I'll tell you, before I get on it, give me 15 seconds on this, Tom. I listen to you nowadays, and I think how special it was to have been privileged to be at the beginning of what's turned into a really great thing.
Well,
so that's how I view it.
You really, I mean, this show would not have happened without your help. You contacted the radio stations around Vermont. You got us on the air.
Now that I've...
And you were doing your own talk show at the time, you know? I mean, you were one of my mentors, too. Okay, enough of this love fest. To your point about school boards.
Enough kissy face, because I want to take exception with something you said, though, and it's about the school board members and how they should be doing the bus driving and substitute teaching because they're the ones that set the budgets and all this other stuff.
Did I hit a nerve here?
Well, it's not so much a nerve, and I'm speaking from 10 years' experience as a Vermont school board member. So people's experiences may differ across the country. But my experience is that we actually, as school board members, had very little control over things like opening and closing of schools, curriculum, requirements for bus drivers, et cetera. And a lot of what we dealt with as school board members, it was important, but it was internal policies. And it was policies that dealt within a very well-defined sandbox that we were given by the state government to operate within. So I think a lot of...
So who should we recruit, Rama, to drive the buses and substitute teach by way of saying, oh, yeah, if you think it's safe for me, how about you? Would it be the state legislature?
You know what? I got to tell you, Governor Phil Scott up here is a moderate Republican, and he's in many ways genuinely what you would consider moderate, but he still carries that R next to his name. And I've said very publicly, and I'll say it to his face if I get a chance to, I think that it's become a character defect right now to keep that R next to your name.
Yeah.
Nobody should be made to be driving these school buses with kids in them. Nobody should be made to be going in to do the... substitute teaching or even the teaching under these circumstances. We all know proximity is what spreads COVID-19. It's no secret. Right. We know this for beyond a fact. The closer the proximity, the easier it spreads. There is not a shadow of a doubt about it. So I think there's a lot of other good answers that could be done. You know, the teachers, whether they're unionized or not, want to work with us. The school boards want to figure out something that makes sense. The parents do. You know, everybody's concerned about the students except for, and I would call Trump an idiot, but I don't want to insult idiots. I swear to God, this guy, he is horrible. And don't think that he can't get this, I won't call win re-election, but don't think he can't continue his presidency. Because if we don't work hard to make sure it doesn't happen, it will happen. And more stupidity. Listen, I think he's actually going after the public school system with this demand. I really do. I think what he's trying to do...
Well, that's Betsy DeVos has been working her whole life to destroy public schools.
Yeah, so I think this is just part of... If they can make it too expensive, too untenable, and just absolutely unworkable in order to do this... There's the modern-day Trump-McConnell GOP dream.
Right. Plus, in poor communities in America, particularly largely black, urban poor communities, the internet service is crap and expensive. And, a lot of people can't afford it and don't have it. And so, so much for distance learning. Another great way to disenfranchise poor communities in general and communities of color in particular. Rama, thank you. Brilliant.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And a tip of the hat again to Rama and his wife for putting up with me. We'll be back in just a minute.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Ruth Marcus, Supreme Ambition, Brett Kavanaugh and the Conservative Takeover. This is from the prologue. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy had a request. Would President Trump have a few minutes to speak privately? It was April 10th, 2017, a sparkling spring morning in Washington, and Kennedy was at the White House to preside over the ceremonial swearing in of the newest Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch. First time in history that a sitting justice had sworn in one of his former law clerks to join him on the bench. Just 80 days into Trump's chaotic presidency, the confirmation of Gorsuch represented a rare and welcome victory for the beleaguered new administration, reeling from court defeats of its travel ban and, despite controlling both houses of Congress, unable to repeal President Obama's signature health care law. Perhaps most important, as the prominent conservative lawyers, activists, and judges assembled in the Rose Garden that day understood, Gorsuch's addition was just one step, necessary but not sufficient, in the 3 decades-long conservative bid to cement control over the high court. This effort had been as frustrating as it was lengthy. Seeming opportunities for dominance repeatedly slipped away, with Republican nominees, including Kennedy himself, turning out to be less reliably conservative than advertised. But Republicans have learned from these costly errors, assembling a farm team of potential nominees whose judicial records could be carefully scrutinized to detect any risk of ideological deviation. Gorsuch was among those who came bearing the seal of approval of the Federalist Society, the conservative legal group that had made itself the central actor in this court-shaping exercise and was playing an even more outsized role in the new administration. Trump took pains to single out one man who was not in the Rose Garden that day, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for all he did to make this achievement possible, quoting Trump. Indeed, everyone present knew that McConnell had been the indispensable man leading to that moment. Had it not been for McConnell, President Obama would have filled the vacancy created by Justice Antonin Scalia's sudden death in February 2016, and Justice Merrick Garland would be sitting on the high court, anchoring a newly fortified liberal majority. McConnell, with his audacious announcement that the opening would not be filled, no matter that Obama had 11 months remaining in his term, had avoided that fateful outcome. His intervention meant that Gorsuch now occupied Scalia's seat, a conservative for conservative swap. The next vacancy was almost certain to be the far more critical one, shifting the court's balance instead of affirming it. On that score, all eyes were on the 80-year-old Kennedy, then serving his 30th year on the high court and, by dint of age, years of service, and political allegiance, the most likely to depart. The swing justice on an already conservative court, Kennedy was pleased about Gorsuch, but he had another former law clerk in mind as he was ushered into Trump's private dining room for an unusual session with the president and White House counsel Don McGahn. Justices are routinely invited to the White House for social events, state dinners, and holiday parties, but at least until Trump took office, such one-on-one meetings were rare in the modern era. With its finicky notions about preserving the appearance of judicial independence, unlike the relaxed days when justices did double duty as private counselors to presidents such as Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. In the chronically leaky Trump White House, aides took pains to keep the Trump-Kennedy meetings secret. There were no public reports about the session, and only a few senior officials ever learned what Kennedy said to Trump that day. The justice's message to the president was as consequential as it was straightforward, and it was a remarkable insertion by a sitting justice into the distinctly presidential act of judge picking. As a candidate, Trump had upended tradition by issuing a list of judges. It ultimately grew to 21, including Gorsuch, from which he pledged to pick his Supreme Court nominees. Now Kennedy had a recommendation for Trump's list. "You named one of my former clerks," Kennedy told Trump. "You should think about another one, Brett Kavanaugh." When Anthony Kennedy spoke, the Trump White House listened, with good reason. During the campaign, when Trump, against all expectations, emerged as the Republican nominee and ultimate victor over Hillary Clinton, the issue of judicial selection had been a utilitarian means to an electoral end. The socially conservative and evangelical voters Trump needed to win were deeply, understandably suspicious of the thrice-married, once Democratic New Yorker. They were particularly dubious about how Trump would approach the critical task of shaping the federal judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. The list of high court candidates that Trump produced with the help of the Federalist Society, upending convention with typical Trumpian bravado, was explicitly aimed at calming their concerns, and it succeeded beyond the wildest expectations of its creators. On Election Day, more than a quarter of Trump voters identified the Supreme Court as the critical factor in determining their vote. White, evangelical, born-again Christians broke 81% for Trump to 16% for Hillary Clinton, meaning that Trump outperformed previous Republican nominees Mitt Romney, John McCain, and George W. Bush among such voters. In office, Trump not only keenly understood the politics of judicial selection and its importance for his reelection, he also gained a new appreciation for what the Supreme Court meant to a president's legacy. Thanks to McConnell's ruthlessness, Trump had inherited what no president had before, the gift of an existing vacancy. Supreme Ambition by Ruth Marcus.
Don't. Connor Gibson with Greenpeace USA is here about 3 states making protesting fossil fuel pipelines a felony. Is protesting becoming illegal now? Robert Weissman with Public Citizen drops by. He's concerned about Trump's land management pick. The guy's a climate-denying extremist. I'm concerned, too. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is telling us about even more nuclear waste that they want to bury under New Mexico's desert. Plus, geeky science. Does sitting cause cancer? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. In our special video for supporters of our program, people who sign up over at thomhartmann.com, this week it's the story of what the rich libertarian billionaires who have been funding the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party for, well, in a big way since the election of Ronald Reagan for the last 40 years, and have succeeded by owning politicians and owning the Republican Party in preventing us from even getting a public option, much less a national health care system. What they are doing, what their answer is, what their response is to the question, what do we do when things really go bad? When the economy's falling apart, when epidemic disease is sweeping the country, what do we do? Well, it turns out they've got an answer. It's just not an answer for all the rest of us. They're getting in their private jets and heading off to their private little bunkers. Seriously, that's what they're up to. So I lay out the whole story, complete with details and names, over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Thanks so much. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Hey, Professor, that book you just read was by Nancy McLean. It's called The Democracy in Chains, The Radical Right Stealth Plan for America. And what I took from that book was this. She says, America's got the oldest democracy in the world, but it's the least responsive democracy in the world. But that's not why I called you. When I heard you read that book, I've been familiar with her works. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I watch a TV program called Law and Order, and there's an attorney on there named McCoy. And McCoy, he would prosecute Donald Trump for negligent homicide, no doubt about it. And I would personally consider Mr. Trump an enemy of the state. And you had a caller earlier that was talking about some of the social issues we got and how we can never change. I was with him until now. This Black Lives Matter movement that's taking place, most of the people out there are not black. All right, America is in a transition right now. And the most obvious evidence of America being in a transition right now, when you're watching your TV, look for an advertisement by what is called the Lincoln Project. It's called the Lincoln Project. These are Republicans calling out other Republicans. If you never thought you'd ever see that in your lifetime, you're a witness to it right now. We're going to be all right. And even if Mr. Biden is not young and strong and energetic, he ain't got to be, because that fool is going to have one hell of a powerful cabinet when he get up in there. All right. Thanks, Tom, for taking my call.
I agree, Morris. I agree. And I'm voting for Joe Biden more for the people he's going to surround himself with than he himself. But, I'm there. Bill in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Tom, I know this is going to sound like an awfully broad-based question, but I've been thinking that eventually when schools started up, that was going to become the 800-pound gorilla, because there's not many things that happen where you've got that many of a certain age group all in a combined environment at one time. So my question is this. And this is part of the question. What can we do now to finally control COVID? You forget what's happened in the past, because the past is the past, without completely destroying the economy. That's That's a concern I've got, because I think both of those issues, the illness, and if the economy goes really in the tank, I think we are going to have a problem as a country.
Okay, here's my answer to you, Bill. First of all, the phrase destroy the economy is one that we all need to extract and remove from our vocabulary. This economy is too large. There's too many people. There's too much wealth, even the wealth left with the working and middle class, for the economy to ever be completely destroyed. What will happen is it goes on pause. There's a lot of damage done. A lot of people get hurt. A lot of people lose their homes. A lot of people lose their lives, frankly. And a lot of businesses, particularly smaller businesses, get wiped out. Larger businesses should be getting wiped out, but the government's stepping in to intervene. But the point is that if you look at what has worked in other countries, what worked in Australia, what worked in New Zealand, you know, they're playing soccer games in New Zealand with stands full of people now. What worked in Taiwan, what worked in... No, let me finish this thought, and then you can rebut me or whatever you want to try to do, Bill, but or however you want to do it. What all those countries did was they locked down completely for about 2 months. That's long enough to take the spread of the virus from a massive explosion down to a little tiny trickle. So basically, it puts out the fire, to use the metaphor of fire that Trump likes to use. It puts out the fire, and now you've got to go around and find where the embers are, the ones that still have the possibility of erupting into a fire again. For that, you put into place a comprehensive, thorough national testing program that literally is testing everybody in the country. And that's what they're doing in China. In Wuhan, they tested 11 million people in 8 days. Every single person in the city. You've got every single person in South Korea being tested, every single person in Taiwan, in Australia, in New Zealand, in France, in Germany, you name your country that has successfully controlled this thing. You put comprehensive testing into place, and whenever you find somebody who tests positive, you contact trace them, you contact all those people, and you quarantine them. And that way, instead of having a national lockdown, which you have to have for a couple of months to get that fire out, and so you pause the economy for those couple months. Then after that, you open it back up again with, number one, everybody has to wear a mask, because we know that that'll radically cut transmission. As long as you can keep that transmission rate below one person infects one other person, and get it down to like 0.6, 0.5, 0.4, which happens just from wearing masks. As long as you can do that, eventually the virus dies out, as long as the transmission rate is below 1, that R0 number. So you have everybody wear masks, you have people social distance, you reorganize the way that your restaurants and public venues and things are organized, because this is frankly until or unless there's a good vaccine. I mean, we're kind of like where polio was in 1955. Until you've got a good vaccine, this is what we have to live with. And frankly, I think it's going to be a couple of years until we even know if a vaccine works. So that's how you do it, Bill. Did I explain? And then you can bring your economy back, as countries all around the world are doing that have done this.
But the question I was going to ask, though, was this. In the roughly 2 months that the economy got virtually shut down, the federal government came in and threw money at it like crazy. And I've heard you say this. If that happened again for another 2 months, where is the money coming from the federal government to do it, except to print money? I mean, where would they come from?
The federal government can print money, Bill.
Have revenue. Huh?
Yeah, there's something close to $200 trillion in U.S. currency floating around the world. We are the reserve currency of the planet. If the Fed prints a couple of $1 trillion to keep the economy afloat for a few months, it will have no impact on inflation or on the value of the dollar. And it can be recovered as the economy returns. The problem that we're facing right now, Bill, is not deficit spending or debt or national debt or the value of our currency. Problem we're facing is that we've got a friggin' pandemic going on, and we're the only developed country in the world who doesn't have a national policy to deal with it, because Donald Trump is incompetent, if not malicious. I think that there are some people in his inner circle, I think Stephen Miller's probably at the top of this list, who are saying, most of the people who die from this are either old, unhealthy, or, hey, special bonus, black or Hispanic. This is, you know, they make a joke. They call it the boomer remover. This is our chance to get rid of all those people on Social Security, or enough of them that Social Security will be solvent. This is our chance to get rid of all those pesky black and brown people and create good jobs for the remaining white people who are younger and healthier. You know, I mean, this is eugenics on steroids, Bill, unless you've got another explanation for why Trump is forcing America to be literally the only damn country in the developed world that doesn't have a federal response to this.
Well, no, that's true. Oh, can I tell you one positive thing before I leave?
Yeah.
The last protest we had in Richmond was last Saturday. It was armed Black Lives Matters people at State Capitol, and it was a thing called the Virginia Defense League, the same ones that had the big rally back in the fall. They all got together. There was no problems because they were down there. It was mainly a Second Amendment protest, because everybody figured that this was going to be turned into a firefight. Everything went fine, and I said that's the strangest thing I've heard for having two disparate sides agree on something and come away from it. Yeah, may not be the most perfect thing, but it was kind of funny the way it happened. Well, thank you.
It is an interesting dynamic.
No, it was because they, you know, it's just, you know, everybody thought it was going to be, you know, you could pick what potentially would look like the worst two groups, but they had a common cause. So, well, thank you very much. I enjoy the rest of your program then, I guarantee you.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks. Good talking to you. And thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. I appreciate the call. Now, I really think that this is not some, you know, something that we have to, you know, focus group or figure out or anything. All you have to do is look at what Germany is doing, right? Look at what Norway is doing. Look at what Taiwan is doing. Look at what New Zealand is doing. Look at what Australia is doing. Look at what China is doing. Country after country after country have figured out how to deal with this virus. It's real simple. And by the way, it's also going to help you during flu season. You're going to have fewer deaths and sickness from flu. I mean, you know, this is common sense stuff, but Trump won't do it. Why?
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I get it. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday. I continue to think, though, and I don't think it's a conspiracy theory, that Trump thinks that, hey, this is a good thing. It's killing off some people who should be killed off. And welcome back. Heather in Lansing, Michigan, my hometown. Hey, Heather, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I just have some thoughts. First, let me preface with over 7,000 kids already in the state of Florida have tested positive just since the state opened. And the schools aren't even open yet. So let's just keep that in mind. Now, the thing that really bothers me is the short-sightedness of all of it. Chickenpox is a virus. And it stays in your body forever, and later could become shingles. That's right. What's another one? Oh, MS.
Herpes.
Multiple sclerosis. Yeah, herpes. But multiple sclerosis gets triggered by a virus at some point. You know?
Yeah, herpes causes cancer down the road. I mean, you know, papilloma.
HPV.
Human papilloma virus causes cancer down the road.
Yep.
Throat cancer and cervical cancer.
Well, and aside from all of these things, AIDS is a virus. You know, and yes, we know AIDS, and it does stay with you forever. But they're also understanding now that it affects the heart muscles. It's not just what we thought. So how can people be so reckless? No, AIDS, the AIDS virus.
Okay, sorry.
They're finding that out now with further.
Okay.
COVID affects a ton of different organs, and it affects your pancreas directly. It's affecting your lungs and your heart and your small blood vessels. But how can people be so reckless as to throw their kids into the Petri dishes? And I understand that people need to make money because the government has failed and not shut down the economy and not made it okay for people not to have to work if they don't have to, which we don't if they can make it that way. But come on. Not only might it kill grandma or Uncle Jim or your sister who's fighting breast cancer and doesn't know it yet, but these kids could, 10 years from now, all be diabetic, all have neurological issues. All of them could have some form or another of something that we have no idea about yet because we haven't had time to understand this virus. And it's just disgusting. And I wish people.
This is why every other country in the world, Heather, is trying to put this thing down.
Well, yeah, I mean, because you don't know what it is. You just don't know what it is. And the thing that's really frustrating, too, is if you take that complete argument and transfer it to the masks, get over yourself. Put a mask on. You not only might be preventing your child, who knows what, yourself from who knows what, but don't tell me about your right not to wear a mask when you don't want to hear about my right not to get infected. It's so frustrating. And you know I'm in Michigan, and it's not even 50-50. It's probably 70-30, and that's being generous.
What's 70-30?
That people will wear a mask and won't wear a mask. You know, I mean...
So which side is which? 30%
will. 70% are fighting it. Or they will, but I'm going to wear the same mask all the time, and I'm only going to wear it if I'm in the store for a while, not for a quick 5-minute run, or not to the gas station, or not if I'm running and breathing heavily for a mile. It's so frustrating, but I wish people would be a little more, and I'm not a healthcare professional, I'm not a researcher, but I understand that chickenpox, everybody understands chickenpox. Remind them that viruses can stay with you for your whole life and can affect you later. If one of them gets shingles in their nether regions when they're 70, they might wish they had not been exposed as a child. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah. Heather, thank you. Thank you. Well, very well said. That was a great rant. I appreciate it. It's 49 minutes, coming up on 10 minutes before the top of the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. We are going to get through this. We're going to be a better country for this, frankly, although it is going to be tough for a while. Stick around. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we have a new video up for our supporters over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about Steve Wilson and Jane Aker, who were guests on this program back in the early 2000s. A couple of reporters for a Fox television station down in Florida who put together an investigative report on bovine growth hormone that Monsanto tried to squash. The Fox station told them that they had to actually lie on the air, saying that there was no health risks associated with GBH, what's now called RGBH. They refused to lie. They got fired. They appealed. They went to court. They won a judgment against the Fox station. And then the Fox station appealed that, and the appeals court said, no, it's okay for a TV station to order their reporters to lie on the air. And that's been the law ever since. It was 2002, 2003. And you combine that with the Telecommunications Act of 96, and we have an insane media landscape. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Mike in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for everything you do for us. What I'd like to know is how can we prevent the Republicans from blaming the Democrats for their irresponsible and unsustainable legislation? For instance, if Trump does have the schools, has any effect opening schools, the actual negative effect of that might take months, and maybe hopefully there'll be a Democrat in the White House by then, and they'll turn around and go, oh, look, the school system's in disarray. We got all these negative effects from that. We've got, of course, we're going to have terrible coronavirus cases, and they'll say, look, it's all his fault now. How do we prevent that?
Yeah. Well, I think that, the next president, assuming that it's Joe Biden, and I think it's a fairly good assumption right now, the next president is going to have to just say to the American people, here's the truth, here's what's going on. And in my opinion, this is how it should play out. I'm not speaking for Joe Biden at all, but if you look at what has happened in Taiwan, what has worked in Taiwan, in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Korea, in Germany, in France, in Norway, in Denmark. I mean, pick your country, right? Every country all around the world, among all the developed countries in the world, the only outlier here is Sweden and to some extent the UK, or at least England. Scotland has locked down. Is what you do is you shut, once you've got a raging fire going on, which, you've got, which we have right here in the United States, you shut down everything for a couple of months. You put the economy on pause. You have the federal government deliver paychecks to people, and they have our tax revenues. They have our tax reports. They know how much we earned last year. Just give us that amount of money this year, or at least a few months worth, identical to that, and up to a certain threshold. And forget about United Airlines and all these big companies. You don't have to bail them out. In fact, if United went out of business, it would create a huge opening for a half a dozen small regional carriers, which would increase competition and be a good thing for America. So pay the individuals, not the corporations, number one, to keep the economy alive. Number two, once, that will kill the infection rate. It'll collapse it. We've seen that in state after state after state. Look at New York State right now. It'll collapse the infection rate. Then you do comprehensive testing and tracing. You test absolutely everybody, and anybody who tests positive, you quarantine them, and you find out who they may have infected, and you start quarantining them. And you get it to the point where it's just little tiny eruptions around the country happening from time to time that you can put out with a small quarantine. And then at that point, you can open the entire economy back up. But you have to have a national face mask law, and you have to have, appropriate social distancing. We've got to reconfigure our bars, our restaurants, our theaters. I mean, it's going to require some substantial changes, or those businesses are basically going to be sacrifice zones for the next couple of years until the vaccine actually starts to take effect. I said earlier, I think that we are where this country was at around 1955 with regard to polio. Hey, there's a vaccine on the horizon, here it comes, but, be careful. People didn't let their kids go into pools. There's all kinds of things that people did in the 30s, 40s, 50s to avoid their kids getting polio. We just need, it's not like we don't know how to do this stuff. We've figured it out, and it's not like other countries haven't done it before us. And, it's just going to require a massive public, information campaign. The one thing that concerns me, though, Mike, about all this are these memes that are proliferating on Facebook, because Mark Zuckerberg is just fine with billionaires and foreign governments ruining America. Saying that if you wear a face mask, you're going to experience oxygen deficiency, or men who wear face masks aren't real men, or people who wear face masks are just trying to be Democrats, or whatever, all this kind of stuff. Most of that is actually not coming from inside the United States. A really substantial portion of the bots and posts and things are being tracked to other countries, and not just Russia, other countries that don't like democracy. They don't want America to be, the beacon for the world. They don't, America has always been the country that, even though we've very imperfectly acted out democracy here, it's still been a hell of a lot better than most of the countries of the world, or many of the countries of the world. And they just don't like that. We've got a war going on right now between autocratic oligarchy on the one hand, in the Philippines, in Hungary, in Russia, in India, pick your country, right, where you've got an autocratic oligarch. Between that form of government and of course, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia and Netanyahu in Israel, between those autocrats and strongman government types and good old-fashioned democracy. And they're trying to tear down our democracy. And one of the ways that they're trying to do it is to sicken as many people as possible. Trump is an oligarch, so it probably shouldn't surprise us that he's working on behalf of the oligarchs of the world to destroy democracy in America. But I really believe that that's what he's doing, and that now he's using the coronavirus to do it and forcing people back into school. Tear this country apart. That's his agenda, period, full stop. Tear the damn thing down. He's already gutted, he's closed over 100 different regulatory agencies. He's gutted several hundred others. He's got the IRS. They laid off 15,000 IRS workers or gave them early retirement. The IRS is to the point where they literally can't even audit rich people anymore. They've given up on it. The EPA has shut down. It's amazing.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, et cetera, not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters, not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killing. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. "A slave is as good as gold," Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
On the line with us is Chloë Waterman, the program manager of Friends of the Earth. FOE.org is the website, and FOE_US is their Twitter handle. And Chloë, welcome to the program. I understand that Friends of the Earth is joining with 120 other groups for specific actions, a week of action against Tyson Foods. Tell us about this.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an exciting week to see so many allies across different sectors, environmental groups, labor groups, animal welfare, band together to address the horrific treatment of workers that Tyson has had during COVID-19. The jobs in these slaughterhouses are, even before COVID, are among the most dangerous jobs in the country. But during COVID, it's just been a catastrophe. As of today, I just checked, and there's 34,000 workers at meatpacking plants who have tested positive for COVID. More than 140 people have died. And Tyson is responsible for a large number of those, double the rate of any other meatpacking company. So they really need the public to pay attention and call on them to create a safe workplace for employees.
When Trump invoked the Defense Production Act and basically forced workers to go back into these plants, I know some of them were shut down, some of them were even trying to retrofit in ways that might protect some of the workers, and they abandoned that because Trump said you've got to go back now. Did that provide a limitation of liability for these companies so that they can't be sued by the families of their dead employees?
Well, that's exactly why the companies lobbied Trump to issue that executive order. But if you actually read the executive order, it has limited power, and these companies absolutely have the choice and can shut down their operations when they have positive COVID cases in them. Also, the reason for Trump's executive order claiming that we need this because there's going to be a meat shortage in the country, it's a complete farce. He did it completely to protect the bottom lines of these companies. Our meat stores for chicken and beef are the same as they were during this time last year, our cold storage. And for pork, they're down only slightly. There's really no reason that these plants need to be kept open without protecting workers.
I understand the largest pork producer in the country, Smithfield Foods, is actually owned by the Chinese. and that when Trump forced them to go back to work, and I put that in quotes because you're right, they asked him to do it, that they exported, as I recall, thousands of tons or tens of thousands of tons of pork to China. I mean, this was not even to supply the U.S. market. The reason why the Chinese bought the largest pork producer in the United States, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, please, was to provide pork to the Chinese marketplace. Do I have that right?
You have that right, Tom, and it just goes to show that it's just a lie that we need to keep these plants open to protect our food supply. Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker, senators, are issued an inquiry into this exact fact. Why are you claiming that we need to do this to protect America when we're, in fact, putting the lives of our workers in danger only to export this meat to China?
You know, it seems like there's even a larger issue here. I mean, yes, maybe this is a bit of a digression, but when Canada discovered that they had all these coal sands, the tar sands up there, this is insanely poisonous oil, or it's like a sludge, and refining it throws into the air and leaves behind giant piles of insanely toxic stuff. And the Canadians said, we're not going to allow anybody to refine this into gasoline or diesel fuel in Canada. So what did we do? Well, the Koch brothers have a refinery down in Texas that takes Venezuelan oil, which is just slightly lighter, and processes that. We'll build a pipeline down here, and Americans get the poison, Americans get the pollution, and the refinery is exporting the gasoline and diesel fuel to other countries, including China. So Canada gets the money from the sale of the tar sands, China gets the oil and the gasoline, and we get the poison. I'm seeing the same thing happen with meat production. You know, the Chinese don't want the giant waste pools that come from factory farms with pigs. They don't want the poisoning of the groundwater. They don't want the poisoning of the local people. They don't want the spread of, antibiotic-resistant bacteria as a result of these giant operations, contaminating the rest of their food supply. And so we send them the nicely, cut and disinfected meat, and we keep the poison here. Does this make sense, what I'm suggesting here, that this is like, somebody has sold out America to the world, and we get in these two cases, and I'm guessing there's dozens of others, we get the poison, somebody else gets the product, and somebody else gets the money.
I think that's quite an analogous scenario. I mean, and you hit on a crucial point there too, Tom, which is that their whole model, Tyson's model, Smithfield's model, it's built on exploitation at every stage. And you mentioned the pig waste lagoons, whether it's pork, chicken, or beef, near these plants and near the factory farms, the communities that live there are just decimated with the toxic pollution that comes out of these. And then in the communities where these animals are slaughtered right now, that's where they're being hit by COVID. It's not just the workers. They're going back into their communities. These workers are mostly people of color and immigrants, and they're going back to their communities, and it's spreading even more. Tyson and Smithfield exploit everyone along the supply chain. The workers are one example that happened long before COVID. The animals are another. The local communities, their contract growers, everyone is exploited at this. And eaters, people who are buying this at the grocery store, the stores, Walmart and Costco that are purchasing Tyson foods, the food service corporations like Aramark, they are all complicit in this exploitative supply chain. And we're seeing right now just how exploitative it is, just how little these companies care about their workers during COVID.
Right. And you kind of have to be an old fart like me to remember this. But back in the 60s, my wife's father, one of his favorite things was steak tartare, which was literally raw beef. And he used to put an egg in a glass of orange juice every morning and stick it in the blender and drink that for his breakfast. You can't do that anymore because of factory farms spreading bacteria that have mutated, into virulent forms that literally didn't exist in the late 50s and early 60s, or even through the 70s, I believe. It's like it has completely changed. So people are buying these products at the supermarket, bringing them home. They're covered with salmonella and E. coli. They put them on their kitchen counter, and even if they cook the food, they want, and then they prepare their lettuce on the same counter, and they wonder why they're getting, sometimes mild, sometimes severe cases of food poisoning. It's like we're being poisoned even in our own kitchens. It's insane. Tell me about the groups, Chloe. We're talking with Chloë Waterman, the program manager at Friends of the Earth. Tell me about the groups. We have just a minute to the break. Tell me about the groups that are engaged in this week of action.
Absolutely. Well, we're really following the lead of a group that I want to highlight that's been doing amazing work on the ground in Arkansas, Tyson's home state, Venceremos. They have been fighting for protections for poultry wars from Tyson since even before the start of COVID, but since the beginning of it. But they haven't gotten the changes that we need to see from Tyson. So they reached out to allies from environmental groups like us. So we have Greenpeace, NRDC, Union of Concerned Scientists involved. We have animal welfare groups like the ASPCA and the Humane League, food chain groups, the Food Chain Workers Alliance, more than 150 groups across all sectors, because this issue is so timely, it is so urgent. If Tyson doesn't change their practices, workers will continue to die.
And how can the average person participate?
Two ways. I think we need to target Tyson and hold them accountable. Users can visit foe.org/Tyson, and users can call their senators and demand that the Senate require OSHA to issue mandatory worker protections.
There you go. Chloë Waterman, program manager at Friends of the Earth, foe.org. Check it out. And thank you, Chloe. Thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Have a great afternoon. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, America has become the dumping ground for toxic waste. Donald Trump wants to make us the dumping ground for viruses in our schools. And welcome back. Dan in Baldwin, Michigan. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Greetings, Thom Hartmann. I'd like to start out with a shout-out to Kenyatta from Idlewild, Michigan. And this is about enrollment in schools. I think the children should all go back as soon as Baron von Trump is enrolled in a public school in Washington, D.C. without a subpoena.
Right. That's a good one.
And
he's a young teenager now. He could be going to high school in assuming he's in high school in D.C. They've got some very good public schools.
Well, that's where he belongs, just with the rest of them. But I'd like to ask you a question. Whatever happened to Bob Ney?
Bob, the company, Talk Radio News, that then became Talk Media News, that company went out of business. And so Bob is now doing his thing like, he used to report on our show. He's doing that for a few other radio stations around the country, local stations. And he does a great job, as always. In order to carry his show, though, you've got to run an ad within the report. And we've got non-commercial affiliates, and so we can't do that. So,
Bummer.
I've told Bob and I still correspond from time to time. I've told him, if he ever wants to drop by, if there's something he wants to rant about, the door is always open on this show. But it just, it didn't work out for us to have him on regularly any longer. But he's freelancing, and I think he's having a good time. And I doubt he's going to India for 6 months every year anymore because of the COVID thing. He used to go hang out with the Dalai Lama every year, but he's still, living in Ohio and living his life. He's a good guy. I
miss him.
Bob. He's a good
Has he got a website?
Yeah, I don't know.
No,
I would be surprised if he didn't.
Up.
But yeah, he's Sean tells me he's got an active Facebook page. So
not a bad.
Anyhow, I got to move along. But
Cogniton.
There you go. Thanks a lot, Dan. It's good to hear from you. Betsy in Seattle. Hey, Betsy, what's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom, for your work. I really appreciate it. My issue is I'd like to remind everybody listening that it requires a high school diploma or a GED to join any branch of the military service. I think what's going on here is a civilian sifting for future employment or future service for the military, whether it's private or public. Private meaning Eric Prince and his sister Betsy DeVos pool of employees in the future, and it's terrifying.
Do I understand what you're saying, Betsy, to be that? Well, actually, I don't understand. Are you saying that Trump wants to put kids back in high school so that they can go to the military?
Yes. I think that if they're forced back to school and end up with a GED or a high school diploma, then they've already been COVID-proofed, and the military can have their pick of who they want to join the service.
You know, assuming that if you've had COVID, you're immune to it. We don't know yet if that's the case.
Well, even if it's not, it still requires a GED or a high school diploma to join the military service.
Right. So we got to keep the schools going. That's an interesting take, Betsy, through that lens of military service. I hadn't considered it. Thanks for bringing that up. Fascinating. Yeah, it's definitely Conspiracy Theory Thursday. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Media. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are signed up, for supporters of our program. And it's about how Donald Trump, 16 days after Mr. Khashoggi was murdered by the Saudis in Turkey and his body dismembered and vanished, 16 days after that happened, without notifying Congress and with virtually no mention to anybody, Donald Trump authorized the transfer of top secret nuclear technology to the Saudis. This should be a serious issue. Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, is raising hell about it because Khashoggi lived in Virginia. But I think everybody in Congress should be raising hell about this. And when you back this up with this new report out from ProPublica that the Saudis were involved in 9/11, it gets real interesting. So you can check that out over at thomhartmann.com. You know, look for our basically members-only video.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I'm sorry, I haven't read your book on the Supreme Court yet, but have you ever read about the slaughterhouse cases in the 1880s?
I have.
And so this involved one of your favorite slimeballs, Stephen Field. And
he actually said the right thing in those cases, you know.
In that case, he did, but he was conflicted about. He didn't say the same thing in Munn versus Illinois when the grain houses wanted to establish, No,
it was 30, 40 years before the court adopted his logic in slaughterhouse. But to the point, let's translate this into regular English. What's your point here, Paul?
Oh, the point is it's the same thing. It's the same issue. As a matter of fact, it wasn't just that. You know, in Chicago in the 1890s, in the early part of the 20th century, the Chicago River used to catch on fire all the time because of all it's called
and the Cuyahoga. Yep.
Yeah, because of all of the refuse, it's termed awful. But the slaughterhouse cases were based on in Louisiana. The slaughtering it just polluted the entire countryside, the entire state, and they wanted to put it into a brokerage house and put it in one place. But, we have this same – as a matter of fact, Tom, back in the Middle Ages, you'd think – and I was shocked to learn this – that I wish I lived in the days when we had pristine rivers where all you had to do was basically throw a string in the water and a trout would bite it. It wasn't. The rivers were polluted in the Middle Ages because they threw all their slaughter waste, all the offal in the rivers.
At least in Europe. I mean, Lewis and Clark said that when they got out here, the Columbia River, when the salmon were spawning, it appeared that you could walk across the river from bank to bank on the backs of the salmon. There were so many.
Right. But exactly in Europe. But in Europe, even in the Middle Ages, they figured it out and they quit doing that. They have other problems with the rivers, but they realized that that's what it was. And what it did also was when you throw that kind of crap in a river, no, the trout can't live there, but the garbage fish, the catfish and the carp, that's who likes that stuff. And then they start to thrive, and they wipe out the trout, and the trout can't survive in that environment anyway. So all of this, and actually they ate a lot less meat in the Middle Ages. They didn't slaughter beef. They had usually a village would have a fiefdom would have 1 or 2 cows that they used for dairy that they would make cheese out of. What they did slaughter was they let the pigs run around wild and eat up the garbage that they threw on the street in the town, and they would slaughter pigs once in a while. And each family or they would have a brand on their pig so they knew whose pig it was.
Same with chickens.
But most of them, they mostly ate chickens, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, thank you. That's a good point. Good points all. Aaron in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Aaron, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
I'm assuming with the schools being reopened, I was thinking that Betsy DeVos and Steve Miller know how to kill people without laying a finger on them. So this is all just part of the plan. Like you said earlier, 2 to 4 times are black people and brown people that are being killed by this. So
you're down with my theory that there's a eugenics aspect to Trump's coronavirus policy.
I was actually going to call you on that, and you answered my question big time. But anyways, how does it work out to actually open up the schools? Like if you're in a rich city like in California, like Palos Verdes, at Beverly Hills, you get the best of everything there. But if you're in a poor city like Compton or East LA, you're pretty much guaranteed to get nothing.
Yeah. Aaron, your phone is funky, is going funky, but your point is well taken. And I think that if Trump is successful in reopening the schools, I think one of the things that's going to come out of this is that many of the private schools are going to reinvent themselves as COVID-safe private schools. They will do the things that they're doing in Taiwan and Germany and whatnot, and provide safe spaces, but for a high price. Betsy DeVos wants to make sure that price is paid by the federal government. She's shoveling money at private schools right now and holding back money from public schools. And the public schools are going to, it's just the continuing ghettoization of the public schools. Louise in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hey, Louise. Got a quick one here. We're going to hit a break in about a minute and a half.
Yeah. My question is whether or not you consider that Putin is advising Trump to keep the economy open in spite of coronavirus. We know that Putin has a great desire to reduce America to a third world nation, and he doesn't care about American lives. He keeps paying for Afghanistan to slaughter American soldiers. All he has to do is compliment Trump on the greatest economy in the world and tell him he'll win the election by keeping it going.
I think it's entirely possible, Louise, although I think, frankly, it's larger than that. I've said before, I don't think Putin is the center of all evil. I think there's basically an international group of billionaire oligarchs who hate democracy and want to bring about oligarchy. And
You're
they're working
listening
with
to
Trump.
the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And Trump is a proud oligarch, and Trump, I don't think likes democracy at all. Frankly, I don't even think he understands it. We'll do that.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in some, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S word former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, I'm asking, will the new definitions of first world and third world be those countries that have the virus under control and those countries that don't? Connor Gibson with Greenpeace USA is here about 3 states making protesting fossil fuel pipelines a felony. Is protesting becoming illegal now? Robert Weissman with Public Citizen drops by. He's concerned about Trump's land management pick. The guy's a climate-denying extremist. I'm concerned too. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is telling us about even more nuclear waste that they want to bury under New Mexico's desert. Plus, geeky science. Does sitting cause cancer? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Our video for the day are for Thom Hartmann Program supporters. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. Is talking about how the Donald Trump presidency has been fundamentally destructive, not just to the United States, not just to our political norms, not just to our body politic, not just to the institutions of the presidency and our governance in general. His disrespect of judges, his disrespect of Congress, his pushing the boundaries of what the Article 2, an Article 2 office can do. But it's also destructive around the world because of the things that he's not doing, that aren't getting attended to. We've got major parts of the world that are spiraling into chaos that could, several of them could trigger World War III. And instead, he's sitting there live tweeting Fox News, literally every morning and every evening. Check it out. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Ralph in Knoxville, Tennessee. Hey, Ralph, what's up?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
I hear you just fine, Ralph. What's on your mind?
Well, let's start off saying that we agree on Trump's insane, right?
I think so, yeah. I think he's mentally ill anyway, yes.
He's mentally ill. And I think the guy realizes that he's not going to be reelected. And I think he's just taking this country down as far as he can, go on his way out. And he don't care how many people he kills or how much destruction he causes with the 4 months. I'm hoping to God that people aren't stupid enough to put that bozo back in there. But that's just all I have to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think he's fixing to withdraw from the race, and he's going to turn it over to my biggest prediction would be a Pence-Haley ticket, Nikki Haley. Just since I got off the air yesterday, just in the last 24 hours, not even 20, for the last 23 hours, I got an email on behalf of Trump from Newt Gingrich. I got an email from Donald Trump titled Our Nation's Children, We Must Think of Them. I got an email from Laura Trump telling me that I was one of 100 people in the entire country who Donald wants to advise him. Each one of these, of course, when you click on the link, they ask you for money. I got one from Donald Trump telling me that my platinum membership card was waiting for me. I'm looking at my email right now, just reading these to you. And just at 11:35 a.m. Pacific time, 2 minutes ago, I got an official Trump poll called The Great American Comeback. America Can't Be Stopped. So that's 5 or 6 fundraisers that I've gotten from Trump in the last 23 hours. This has never happened before. I've been on his mailing list since 2015, and it's always 3 to 5 times a week I get a pitch, asking for money. But now it's coming 5, 6, 7 times a day. I think he's squeezing all the money he can out of the rubes, out of the Trump, the maggots, the Trump followers, And then, at the convention in what is it, 6 weeks or thereabouts, the Republican convention, he's going to come out and say, I got this great business opportunity and I'm going to be building some new properties in Moscow and Turkey and China. And so I'm not going to run for president again. I'm going to turn this thing over to Mike Pence. And then he's going to take this money and keep it because he can do that under the laws. So much of it is going into super PACs. What say you? What do you think?
Well, I say it's time, if we're lucky enough to take the Senate and and the presidency back, and able to call. The first thing they need to do is get rid of the filibuster, go all nuclear, and quit being so damn nice. Do it. Do what needs to be done. Do what needs to be done. Give people.
I agree. It is absolutely time to. Yeah, I'm with you, Ralph. Well said. Thank you. It's time to take names and kick ass. Henry in Gresham, Oregon. Hey, Henry, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hang on, let me take you off.
Hey.
There you go.
Okay, I'm going to put you on hold here for a second because we don't take people on hold on speakerphone. Freda in Bella Vista, Arkansas. Henry's on line too, by the way. Joyce. Freda in Bella Vista, Arkansas. What's on your mind today?
I've been listening to you every day, and today I heard talk of Tyson having some problems with some activists. In the 70s, when I moved here from California, we came here to buy a farm, and we bought a farm, and it was idyllic, and it had water coming out of a bluff just right in the front yard and went into, it was beautiful. He established a pig farm a quarter of a mile east of our farm, and it poisoned our water in many ways. It's a long story, and I'm going to try to say it really fast. We fought him getting people to come in and test the water, finding out that it was E. coli in the water from the pig farm, and we were going to take him to court. We didn't have the money to do that, but we were frantic, and he offered to buy our farm from us, and we refused.
Now, just a Freda, is the he here you're talking about Tyson Foods Corporation, or was there an individual?
Yes, Tyson himself. We were dealing with the old man who owned this is in the 70s. And he brought a tanker truck down filled with water and piped that into our home. And then he started digging a well for us. And the well ended up, when it was finally pumping, being water that was real stinky because it was sulfur water. We lived with that for a few years until our son, who was born to us there on the farm, started developing these terrible places on his legs that we had to take him to the doctor for. It was impetigo, and the doctor said it's caused from him wading in the water. We finally decided to take Tyson up on his offer to buy our farm, and we lost it. And he paid us enough money to build a little house in town. We were there because we were surrounded by 200 acres of woods, and it was just perfect. That was what we wanted. But anyway, he ruined our farm. And years later, when we would drive down there, because it was like miles off of the main highway, we would drive down there. He had torn down the house, the old farmhouse, and he had torn down we had a beautiful barn. He tore it down and built this enormous container to hold his farm equipment because he was farming the place and had animals on it, other animals. Anyway, I have, harbored that in my heart. I am so thankful for the people who are finally coming to some degree of holding him accountable worldwide, because we were unable to do that. We didn't have the money.
Well, the old man's not even alive anymore, is he? Is he, Fred?
No, he isn't, but his son is. His son is in there. And he was a Coke addict who used to come into our restaurant where we were working. And, with Kleenex with him and his entourage.
Oh, geez.
Amazing.
Amazing. That's incredible. Freda, I need to move along, but thank you for sharing your story with us. That's grim, but I'm guessing that many Americans have experienced the exact or some similar stories. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael.
Hi, Tom. Good to talk with you again. I heard you mention about Trump wanting to reopen the schools, and I got to tell you, I smell a rat with that. Because think about it, throughout this pandemic, which he is largely responsible for, when kids were at home learning remotely or even being homeschooled, they were never, ever subjected to the ongoing, I shouldn't say ongoing, but the school violence that we've been hearing about, the bullying, the terrorizing, the mass shootings.
School shootings stopped.
Going on.
We had no school shootings in March, April, May.
Yeah, and a lot of which is due to Trump's rhetoric, his inciting of the Second Amendment, as we've constantly heard back and forth, and they think all their so-called thoughts and prayers are just going to make it like a kumbaya thing. No, it ain't. So I'm wondering, why in the world is it that he wants to rush kids back to school, right back to those conditions, and then add on to the coronavirus itself, which no one has a freaking clue on how to handle it.
Right. Well, I think answer your question, Michael. Why is he doing it? I think he's doing it because he believes that will cause their parents to go back to work, and he wants to make the economy, quote, work, so that the stock market will go up. Although he's got the Fed pumping that like there's no tomorrow. And, as a result, people will say, oh, yeah, it's all good and we should vote for Donald Trump. It's not going to work, and in fact, I think it's going to be a disaster, both for the country and for Trump. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stick around. We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Patrick in Long Island, New York. Hey, Patrick, what's up? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV.
Yeah, hey, Tom. I tell you, I'm a conspiracy theorist all the way along, and I think the band is starting to play, and Trump's planning to march off the stage with a bundle of money from his reelection funds. And true to his word, as he said many years ago, I could run for president, win, and be the first one to make, a killing financially. And also this, I do agree, Trump knows where people's weak spot is, and that's their children. And he's proven this when he was a big fish, trying to be a big fish in New York with the Central Park Five, who were 5 black teenagers who he publicly called for the death sentence for them. They were wrongly convicted and later exonerated. There's the immigrants crossing the border that he still has in a cage, for lack of a better word, with a piece of cellophane over you. And this is still going on, as you mentioned frequently in your program. As far as eugenics, it's a very, very commonly held view by those who have reached what they view as to be the upper status of society, that they were bred for this and born for this, and the others are simply users, takers, and a drain. And good talking to you, Tom. That's my little rant for today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Good to hear from you. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to say, I don't know if I necessarily agree with you about Trump dropping out. First of all, I think he's too narcissistic for that. And second of all, I don't know that he wants it on his legacy that he quit.
Well, he did this 5 times with bankruptcies. I mean, I think I'm guessing he's just looking at it the same way. When you reach the point where you know that you're not going to succeed, Why put any more effort into it? Take whatever you can and walk away. I'm not, I'd assign the probability, Kevin, at 50-50, but that's how I think he's thinking. I think he's got his head back where it was in the late 90s when he declared bankruptcy 6 different times. Each time, of course, he screwed his investors to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Every time he made money on his bankruptcies, but he basically walked away. He said, okay, yeah. He's done this before.
Yeah, I see you on that. I just think that he wants to be loved. He loves the love of his base, and I don't think he wants to disappoint them by just walking away. And I think that they would view him.
Well, I don't think he's going to walk from the presidency. I think he's going to walk to owning a television network, probably One American News, and becoming the big star on it. He sees himself as the next Sean Hannity. And he may well end up that way.
Yeah, I think he's going to end up that way also. I think that he's going to go out swinging like some of the other callers were saying. I think if he's going to go out, he's going to go out swinging and destroy as much of the country as he can before he leaves.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's arguably what I'm saying. I just think he might be willing to leave now. I could be entirely wrong. I mean, time will tell. But the thing that's telling me that he's getting ready to take the money and run is the fact that all the rules of fundraising. I mean, you don't do 7 fundraising email appeals in a single day over and over and over again. You don't do that because what happens is people put you on the damn spam list and then they never get any of them. So why would he do this? Well, I think it's because he's trying to squeeze the last little bit out. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. 9 years before the oligarchs of the South declared war against the North because they wanted to preserve slavery. In fact, they wanted to impose slavery in the North. Many of these guys that these monuments have been built to just came right out and said it. 9 years before that began, Frederick Douglass gave a speech saying, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" A good and important question. It continues to be a question because slavery is still legal in the United States. The 13th Amendment said that slavery can only exist under the color of law. If somebody is charged or convicted of a crime, then they can be held as a slave. And it's still going on in the United States. In fact, it's the main reason why we have more prisoners than any other country in the world, free labor. And then on top of that, we find that the police departments that get more 1033 equipment, they kill more people. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Renee in Paris, France. Hey, Renee. Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I'm with you on this whole Trump thing as far as bailing out of the election. According to NPR, there's $996 million in his campaign coffers. So why not play tug of war where your side eventually drops the rope at the last minute after you collect all the campaign contributions you can get on top of that amount? I mean, this has been about money since day one, and this will certainly make him a rich man probably for the first time in his life, for real. And it just seems to me this is the way it's going to go.
Yeah, I think so, too. I think he's going to use that money to buy One American News Network or something like that. I didn't realize it was $900 million. That's a mind-boggling, nearly $1 billion. That's mind-boggling. But under the laws, under the campaign laws, I don't know if you saw the Stephen Colbert show back in the day when he was doing the Colbert Report. And he created a super PAC and was amazed to discover that when he lost the election, he could keep all that money. And I think that's Trump's plan.
I don't think he cares what the Republican Party thinks about him, and I certainly don't think he cares about what his base thinks either. This has been a money-making venture since day one, and he'd be walking out a billionaire, so why not?
Right, and the reason why he's jacking racism so hard is he's trying to build the base for his white supremacy television network, and it's probably going to be all white supremacy all the time. You know, he'll have Lou Dobbs on trashing Mexicans, and he'll have Tucker Carlson. Well, God only knows if he can afford Tucker, but you know he's going to have. That's what he's going to do, and because he's just breaking all the rules of fundraising. You don't send 7 fundraising emails a day to your donor base, because then they start putting you on the spam list and nobody ever gets any of them. I mean, I may be wrong, but I don't think I am. Renee, thank you. And thanks so much for watching us there in France. It's great to hear from an expat American. By the way, Renee, if I may, real quickly while you're on the phone, how is France? You're living in Paris. How are you all dealing with the coronavirus, and what is France doing about schools this fall?
Well, schools are scheduled to open here, but there's going to be a modified schedule, whereas there's going to be less kids in the classroom for less time, and then they'll rotate through. But there hasn't really, that's the plan anyway, but that may change. But as far as coronavirus goes here, we're doing much better. As of last week, I heard we had 3,000 cases in the entire country, which isn't, that bad. And they're doing an excellent job as far as social distancing and wearing masks. I mean, we don't question it. We don't try to fight it as some of the Americans do, as I see these crazy SB videos. We don't do any of that. We just follow the rules and everybody's safe. And there isn't any protest or question about what we're supposed to do to stay safe.
Wow. So people are actually paying attention to scientists there in France. What a shocking
Absolutely.
idea. Okay.
And don't forget, this is
Renee,
the land of revolution, too. So, I mean, we're following the rules even now. So,
yeah, you're right. The French Revolution was a big deal. Thank you, Renee. Thank you very much. Great talking to you. Bill in New Tripoli, Pennsylvania. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Hey, just want to say I'm a recent convert to your program here. And one of the things that I'd like to bring up is what I enjoy so much about the discussions that happen on your show, and that is that they are based on critical thinking. In other words, the opinions you have, whether you agree with them or not, they are based on fact. And it seems to be rarer and rarer that I am able to turn on the television or even have a conversation with friends that's based on critical thinking, based on facts. And it's become all emotion driven, all reactionary. And I'd like to
Bill, we only have a minute to the end of the show. You got what specifically did you call about, or was it critical thinking?
Well, it's what you think of the lack of that, and why is it that people can't converse and just use facts and try to keep the emotion to a minimum.
I think this goes back to 1987 when the Fairness Doctrine got blown up and all of our news operations all around the country turned into infotainment operations. Prior to that, we used to have presidential debates, for example. That was considered part of your obligation to keep your license to run it commercial free. The League of Women Voters moderated our presidential debates right up until 1988 when George Herbert Walker Bush tried to put such, or no, it was 92 when G.H.W. Bush put such onerous terms on it. He wanted basically the debate to be rigged in his favor, and the League of Women Voters said no, and that was the end of that. And I think that our politics and our education have just gone to hell as a result of the Reagan Revolution. Bill, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Thank you all for being with me today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It doesn't work without you. And by the way, tell your friends how they can find progressive media. We've got a podcast. We're on SiriusXM. We're all over the place. Tell your friends about it. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and those around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.